Okay. I don't see it live. We're live. Okay, perfect. Show.
All right. Well, welcome. I want to welcome our audience. I know we're on LinkedIn Live to our Jump Search Talent Show. Today, we're going to be talking about creating your life rhythm, personal and professional learnings with Jennifer Moore. And for all of those who don't know what Jump Search recruiting does, we help recruiting for companies, but we also help job seekers that need help with their life purpose, career coaching, and interview preps. So that's a little bit about us. And I want to welcome Jennifer. Just a quick little background. We met Jennifer about a year ago, and she was on a panel on, it was talked about VCs and tech startups. And for we talked about, like, Jennifer, your positive energy. It was something that was really amazing, and I was like, I need to stay in touch and get to know Jennifer more. So I'm really excited to have you on here. I will kick it off to Eric to give a more thorough background.
Yeah. So similarly, welcome, audience. Welcome, Jennifer. It's awesome to have you here on our show. Thank you for spending the time with us. I don't think I was there, Michelle, when you met Jennifer, but I met Jennifer at the Silicon Slopes Founders Fiesta. That was sort of our guerrilla marketing event where we hijacked a few tables behind the what was it, the Chipotle or something over at the
J-Dogs.
J-Dogs. Yeah, sorry. And we just had our own little networking event there in our sort of makeshift booth. But anyway, Jennifer, it was awesome to meet you there. I know that there was a lot of people, but even in the few minutes that I had a chance to meet you, one of the things that really stuck with me was, like Michelle said, just your energy, and also just how much you invest in yourself. I mean, we're talking about some of these peer groups, and some of the coaching that that you've participated in, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so anyway, just want to welcome you here, and we had a chance. Some of the things that we do before we do a podcast, we do a little snooping around on the internet and stuff, and it was really cool to see kind of just your career and how it's progressed. And we're hoping to kind of dig into that a little bit more. Obviously, to share tease out some of these learnings for our audience, who are folks that are trying to manage their personal and professional career. A lot of them are job seekers, a lot of them in tech. And so anyway, your story is something that I want to dig into with you today further. You've just by way of quick introduction here. So Jennifer, she started your career in project management with Wells Fargo, and then you went to Zions Bank Corporation. And I think that's where you kind of transitioned into product. And then since then, you've had a career in product, working with Workfront, Pluralsight, and then Close. And so would love to kind of dig into that. But anyway, just want to start off with a welcome. We're doing a lot of talking now, but now we're going to turn it over to you for you to do a lot of the talking. So why don't we just kick it off with, why don't we just kick it off with, what is a life rhythm? What does that mean to you? Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So first off, thank you so much, Michelle and Eric, for having me. I have also enjoyed getting to know both of you over the last year. There's certain people that you meet that you're like, okay, they're doing cool stuff. I want to be a part of this. I don't know what it is. I don't care. I just want to be a part of it. And so I love what you guys are doing with your executive alliance, with all the content that you're putting out. It's just so, I think, beneficial for people to see that they have options and they're able to reach out and be a part of these different things that you guys are creating. And you are connectors fundamentally. And so I love people such as yourselves, and I appreciate the kind words as well. And it's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, we try to be connectors. We do our best. That's sort of the energy that we've seen from you too on online. I mean, just some of the content that you create, it's very giving, and I think a lot of people are benefiting, and that's what part of what prompted us to kind of say, hey, we got to get Jennifer on the show, so.
So life rhythm. Okay, so let's talk life rhythm. I learned this concept of kind of throwing away the idea of trying to find balance in your life. I don't know, it was like 15 years ago. So I first heard it from a professional organizer and her name's Debbie Cannon. And she was really against this idea of work-life balance. And it struck me at the time because that was a big thing is, oh, you need to find a career, especially as a working mother, right? You need to find a career that provides this work-life balance. And I loved the concept of, if you think about balance and being on like a balance beam, and the fact that you're kind of always just teetering one way or another, and it's never like you're never quite there. You're always trying to make these little adjustments. And so calibrating a work-life balance, I think, is challenging, but it's important. I love the concept. I love music. And so I just really love the concept of being more rhythmic about your life as opposed to balance. So using that as the metaphor and thinking through, like, what do I want my life to be like? What's my dream life? What am I building towards? And always having that as your North Star. And then your life is going to have rhythm and what or different rhythms. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's going to feel like Flight of the Bumblebee, like it's going to go all over the place, and you're just going to feel like, oh my gosh. And then sometimes you're going to be like Claire de Lune and just floating through your life, and everything feels amazing and romantic and effortless. And every day could have different, kind of a soundtrack. If you think about the soundtrack of your day, right? Like you're going to have varying things that speed you up or slow you down or take you this way or that way. And so for me, I have kind of just thrown out this concept of work life anything, because especially in 2023, it's just your life. Like, this is my life. It's so tightly integrated. There's so many things that we have control over, especially how we spend our time, even at work or in between work. And so I think just that flexibility, creating that for yourself whenever you can. What do you want your life rhythm to be, right? Like, and if you zoom out, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What's the soundtrack of your life? And I think too often we don't take a step back and listen to the music. Like, what is the music of your life that's happening right now? And is it the channel that you want to be on, or do you want to change the channel? And I think for a lot of people, you kind of get in a trance and you forget to kind of design your own life. So that's what I mean when I say life rhythm.
Yeah, no, I love it. There's a sense of agency, right, that I strive for in how do I influence my life, not just sort of micro, but also like, excuse me, also like in the broader sense, right? And sometimes a lot of times we have to zoom out and kind of look at where we've been, look at where we are today, and look where we want to be, in the maybe the distant future.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't this idea, you mentioned this sort of this bzzz, like everything's kind of crazy. It feels like that for a lot of people, including myself right now. It's there's just a lot of things that are in flux, a lot of uncertainty. And we work with a lot of job seekers, and a lot of folks they're going through this roller coaster, ups and downs, and they're just trying to figure it out. And it's funny because, well, not funny, but when somebody's going through a job search, it becomes this point where they go into deep reflection because they're sort of jogged from their routine, and now they've got to figure things out, and they have to zoom out, or at least I encourage them to zoom out, and kind of reorient,
It's
but
kind of like when music stops, right? Like when you have a
yeah,
job loss and you're involuntarily unemployed, or you're in between things, like it's almost like you get out of rhythm really easily because the music stops and there's no one. I don't know if I want to take this metaphor this far, but it's like there's no one's conducting the orchestra, the big orchestra that you used to be a part of. And it's kind of like, now what? And so you have to reset and be like, okay, now there's this new rhythm that I have to like create for myself, whether that's a daily routine, whether that's how you're approaching your job search, how you're thinking about like micro wins and successes every day. And it's just a different pace than a 9 to 5 or having a regular paycheck. And it's very disruptive across all vectors of your life, like mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Everything is disrupted in a moment. It's like instantaneous, and it's a shock to the system. And I don't think people really take enough time to pause and grieve and really process that loss. And they try to dive in, and just get going, and it's very challenging.
yeah. I mean, there's an anxiousness there, right? Because I think you alluded to this in one of your posts. Well, I think it was today about some folks going to some dark places, and
Yes.
I've seen those roller coasters when I'm working with folks. And, I think a lot of it has to do with this loss of identity, right? Which is a death. It's a form of a death, right? When you lose an identity, part of you dies, and you have to go through that process of grieving it and processing it. Otherwise, it can weigh you down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
I was going to add in that I like that analogy, because when you look at work-life balance, it feels like it's either you're doing really well or you're not doing really well. It's kind of binary. Whereas the life rhythm, it's kind of ups and downs, and you can go into down, like when you're laid off, or just in a really bad spot in your job or your career or personal life, like you're in a low, but that's part of what makes a music piece so beautiful. Like your low is what helps define kind of the lows, and then when you are able to climb that like that, I don't know, it's crescendos or at the very top. I don't know my music very well. So I'm throwing out vocabulary that I don't know anything about. So, but anyways, when you reach the top of something, it's so much sweeter that way. And I love that. I love that analogy. So I know we were kind of talking a little bit about lows. I want to ask a little bit about because you had mentioned there was a low that you had went through. I think it was 2005. Is that correct? Or 2015?
2015 was probably my lowest low. So, yeah.
But I'm kind of curious, like, I don't know if you're open to kind of sharing it, but I just was curious to see, like, what made it low and what did you learn from that experience?
Yes. This is going to be a long one. I'll try to keep it pretty short, but I started working in full time in 2003. So I was at that point just always employed, never took a break, never thought about stepping back. And so I had been just going. I'm a very kind of quintessential type A personality. I say yes to pretty much everything. I love helping people. I just love doing things, just getting things done and moving things forward. So for me, personally, professionally, I had gotten to a point in 2015 where I hit rock bottom. And professionally, what that looks like, or what that sounds like, I guess, is burnout, right? But it was way more intense than that in terms of, like, from a medical perspective. It was very like, there was just a lot that basically crashed in my system, and that created an environment where I was really heavily considering. I was a primary breadwinner, had been since 2003, and was at a point where I had needed to decide if I was going to continue working or not. Basically, if I was able to continue working or not. And in the course of that year into 2016, I had made a decision to stop working. And that meant that my husband, who had never worked really since we had been married, he was at the at-home parent with our two boys. He was going to need to find a career. He was going to need to figure out, how to replace my income. We at one point sold our home. I was just kind of looking at this life of, like, completely disrupting what I had built and not really being able to move forward. And so what that ultimately taught me was really, it's like when someone gives you that option of, like, you can either go down this path or you can go down this path. And this path looks like a lifetime of bed rest and struggling with, energy levels and health issues and all these things. Or you could actually, get yourself out of this and create a life that you really want. And so I was kind of given this, like, option almost of give in and just let it overtake you, basically physically, and defeat you, or crawl your way out of it, right? And the crawl your way out of it was so incredibly painful. It was so incredibly intensive. Looking back on it, I kind of think, like, oh, it might have just been nice to be almost an invalid for the rest of my life and not have to work or, like, do anything. But I chose the path of get myself, like, crawl out of it, work on all the things I needed to. So it wasn't just a matter of, oh, you're burnt out, like take a vacation, or like this was total and utter like shutdown physically, especially, but it affected everything, of course. And so the recovery was similar, right? I had to do everything. I had to attack it from a mental perspective, an emotional perspective, a spiritual, physical, everything, like across the board. It was very expensive. It was very intensive. It was difficult to hold down a job at that point, all of the things, right? But within, about 6 months, I was able to make a good start at a recovery. I would say I'm still in recovery almost, right? Like when you get to that level, it's like my doctor said to me the first meeting we had, she said, um, you will never be the same. You'll never be able to operate the same way. You're never going to be like the same person ever again in your whole life. And I was like, what? And so she just meant like you have to start saying no. You have to start really taking care of yourself. You have to start like monitoring your energy levels. You have to do these things every single day for the rest of your life, like certain activities and things that I have to do to maintain my health. So anyway, bottom line is I learned that I wanted to live basically. I didn't want to just like I wanted to thrive. I didn't want to just want to survive. And I learned that I really did want to continue working and building my career. And it was, yeah, so I'll pause there, but like, it was, it was a pretty hefty, like, oh, it was like everyone talks about anytime you have any version of a rock bottom, right? That could be through addiction. It could be through like a death or a divorce or anything, right? Like any big major shift in your life, you're kind of faced with that concept of like, you can continue going down this path and it's going to like lead to not great places, or you can work to build yourself out of this. And I work to build.
Jennifer, how did you know that you were dealing with like a bigger issue, right? Sometimes, I mean, a lot of us, obviously, we work, a lot of us work hard and we get tired, and we just chalk it up to, I just need to take the weekend off, right? Well, most people take the weekend off. I don't. Um,
Yeah.
but like, like I just need to take some time off and then I'll be back on my feet. Like, how did you know that it wasn't that? It was like something
Yeah.
bigger.
it- these things don't happen overnight, obviously. So I think the biggest signal was just, I mean, the reason I knew it was like so bad is because I got to a point where I couldn't even get out of bed. Like
Oh,
I
wow.
couldn't move, right? Like that's how bad it was. And so just physically it was like complete and utter shutdown, right? And so when you get to that level of adrenal fatigue, you have these like adrenal crashes and your system just completely shuts down and you go into pure survival mode. And so there were a lot of symptoms leading up to that over, a decade, but it was scary because it got to the point where everything in my body hurt, every square inch of my body hurt, and I couldn't move. So I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't really work, I couldn't do anything, right? And so that's when I kind of knew like, okay, this is so bad. But I had been trying to solve different symptoms for years. I had gone to a dozen doctors, a dozen, alternative type doctors, right? I had sought out and tried to figure out what was going on for a while. And so the symptoms started when I was a teenager. Now I know this, right? Like I know the symptoms started when I was a teenager based on my genetics, based on a lot of different factors. But that was definitely that was the crash point, right? That was the moment where it was, and it's similar, I think, to again when a lot of people talk about hit rock bottom. You can get there through a lot of different traumatic experiences. It could be like a one-time thing, or it could be something that builds over a long period of time. So for me, like especially as a leader, as a people manager, um that's just so critical to me now, right? Like there's just no um it's not, what's the word, it's non-negotiable, right, in terms of ensuring that my team members are taking care of themselves and making sure that they are in a good place. So um I'm not perfect. Like I said, I'm still like in recovery. I wouldn't say, because if you tie it to like addiction, and I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, obviously, but like studied this stuff, kind of been through a lot of things in this area. From an addiction perspective, it's like I was a workaholic, right? I was addicted to work. I was addicted to doing. I was addicted to accomplishment and achieving and just never stopping. And so that, I think, if you were to tie it to like addiction and you hit the rock bottom and it's like, okay, you can never do this thing again. Well, like I have to work, obviously, earn money, family and everything. But like I can never do work. I can never put into work the same amount of effort that I used to, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough place to be. And it's, you know, I kind of like how you were talking about this is kind of an addiction. It's addiction to work. Because a lot of people think if I just put my head down and I work, I'll get promoted. I'll get, you know, I'll get more money. Like there's all these things that they think. But in reality, it sounds like you learned it was not healthy for you, from a life rhythm standpoint. I'm kind of curious, how did you get out of that? Like, what steps did you take to recover, to get yourself out of that hole? Because it could be tough.
Yes. So I think one of the best things I did first off was I went to my leader at the time, my manager, and I said, I think I need to go on FMLA. So I asked for help in that respect. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't understand is an option to them for them. And so like as a people leader, I feel like I'm often someone who's introducing that concept to employees for the first time in their career. Like they're hearing about this thing that is FMLA that doesn't just apply to having children or, like maternity leave, paternity leave related, but it's also for, medical conditions or caring for family members, et cetera. So anytime you need that level of like protection, you should talk to HR. You should explore those things. They're there for a reason, and you have that kind of job protection if you need it. So that was the first thing I did was I went to my leader and I asked for support on some kind of FMLA arrangement. The second thing I did was I finally found a doctor that I could work with. She is a nurse practitioner, but I found someone that actually had a data-driven program that covered all the bases. It wasn't this one-off like, yeah, just take some of this medication or do some meditation or rest more, sleep better. Like it wasn't I just find so often like from a medical perspective, we treat the symptoms in such a just fractured way, and we're a whole person. And it goes back to like don't talk like I just don't believe in work life anything, like work life harmony, work life rhythm, work life balance, work life anything. It's like this is my life. Dawn till dusk, this is what I'm doing when I'm not sleeping. And so I think if you approach these types of challenges as the whole person, you'll find a whole solution eventually. And so I found this nurse practitioner who had a program that really resonated with me, and allowed me to dive in deep on the data, which is what I really wanted, was like someone to look at my blood work and go, here's everything that's happening. Not like, oh, your vitamin D is kind of low, or, this hormone's a little bit off, or you need to lose some weight, or, whatever. Like, again, as you're treating symptoms, it's just whack-a-mole. And so many people, when they get themselves to this place like a burnout or adrenal fatigue or crash, you just kind of cherry pick your symptoms. And I think it's really important to look at everything holistically. And that's one of the things that really helps. So that was the second thing, was absolutely find the right healthcare provider, whoever it is. Like you need that guide in place. And then the third thing was this is going to sound weird, but like I did the program, right? So like I did the work. I really committed myself. And that was part of what she expected, right? It was like, you sign up to work with me for a year. You're going to do this program. It's very intensive. It's expensive. But I was like, you know what? Regardless of the sacrifice we have to make, regardless of what I have to do from a time perspective, I'm going to make this work, which means I did sacrifice. Like I didn't leave the house for almost a year. I worked and I slept. That was it. I worked and slept and I did my program. Like I did literally everything she told me to do. I did. And I call that out specifically because I highlighted this on LinkedIn. For job seekers, if we tie it back here real quick, like this type of program, which is a book I highlighted today, This Never Search Alone, like Phil Terry, they really encapsulate a new type of job searching. And it's like, I read this over the weekend and I'm like, if job seekers did 10% of what he recommends or they recommend, um, I think you'd have a lot more people having more success. Like I'm not, I am in no way, in absolutely no way judging or criticizing people who are job seeking. All I'm saying is like with my health scare, it's like there was a program and I did the work, right? I actually did it and it worked. Huh. I sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we get ourselves into this like, woe is me victim mentality. If we're job seeking, if we're going after a big goal, if we need some, something to happen for us, it's like you can wish all you want or talk about it all you want, like do the work, do the damn work. So
Yeah, I was really happy you mentioned that in your post today, and I did comment. I'm leading two groups right now, peer groups within the Never Search Alone community. It's a huge community, like 6,000 people, and it's been growing by
yeah,
leaps and bounds. But a huge part of it is just creating. Well, it's Never Search Alone, right? It's creating a support structure, right? And I would imagine. Well, I'm not. I don't want to imagine. I'll just ask you: Who was your support? What was your support structure like during these difficult times, and how intent were you on actually sort of designing that?
yes. So I would say it became a little bit more insular for me, honestly. That that specific moment in my life, because I was spread too thin. And so I actually, from a support structure perspective, I actually went really small. And a big part of that, the way I would tie it back to like job seeking, is surround yourself with positive, optimistic people. I remember so I had a friend who was kind of going through a similar thing, not totally the same, but it was similar. And so I had a friend and I went to her home and I was telling her, like, I found an answer. I found it. Like, this is so amazing. I have this nurse practitioner. She has this program. I do blood work every 6 weeks. I'm titrating up on these supplements and this medication. And like, I'm feeling better. And I have these symptoms that are kind of starting to get a little bit better. And I'm walking outside like, I was so excited. I was like, oh, I found the answer. And I remember very distinctly, she's sitting there, in her really, really dark home, just very like insulated and because just, sensory overload and everything. But she said, don't get too excited. Like it always comes back around. Like you're not going to have this level of energy and these you're not it's not always going to be this good, and you just don't get ahead of yourself, kind of thing. And I'm just the type of person who I'm like, forget that. Like, no. So same thing with job seeking, like surround yourself with positive people, find that support group of people who are pushing you, who are holding you accountable, who are excited about new things that they find or ways to beat the system, like, whatever it is, right? Like I cannot stress that enough. Like when you put together your support structure, just don't even give any like credence. I mean, yes, if you need to sit and vent or cry or whatever, everything is okay going through this experience. It really is. And I speak from very, very personal experience here. Like I been there, done that, been there, done that, been there, done that again and again. So like you need those moments, but in general, surround yourself with people who are positive, that are excited about the next job opportunity, the thing that you found that you think might help, a network or whatever, because it's too hard to entertain negative people and thoughts. And I never stepped foot in that person's house again, because I was like, okay, you're going down a certain journey and you're really like badge of honor. I have these diagnoses and I'm gonna, I don't think she really wanted to get well. And I was like, no, I am not going to be sitting here on bed rest for the rest of my life. Like, this is not an option. Get yourself up, pick yourself up, make it happen. And I'll just share a quick story. Like, the thing inside of me that is so kind of galvanized around like, just do it, like do the program. People who complain and act like victims, I think sometimes are not actually doing the work. And so I'll just share a quick story about that. So the thing that solidified that for me was in high school. I was in a show choir. So if you've watched like Glee Club, or Glee, I guess it's called Glee. You watch like the show Glee, or what's another good one? I don't know. There's a couple, but so singing and dancing, right? Our dance captain, this woman that worked with us, our dance captain said to the group, you all need to go home and practice the routines every night before bed. Because when you do something right before bed, it kind of locks in and then your mind percolates on it and, works on it overnight for you, right? It just memorization, studying for tests, things like that is best to do before bedtime. So she said that's what to do. And I said, great. So I started doing that. I rehearsed the routines in my bedroom, did the dances, went through the motions every single night before bed. And about a month later, or maybe it wasn't even a month, it might have been like a couple weeks, but the director, the choir, the music director, the actual director, and then the dance captain came up to me and they pulled me aside after rehearsal and they said, Jen, you are really standing out. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Cause I thought, oh, I'm not doing it right or something. And they said, no, like your movements are so crisp. Like you're on the beat. You remember everything. Like you just look so different than everyone else. Like, what are you doing? They were like, what's the secret? Like, why do you look so much different and so much better than everyone else dancing? I'm not a great dancer, by the way. I'm not like awesome. Anyway. And I said, I did what you asked us to do. Like I rehearsed before bed. Like, isn't everyone doing that? I figured everyone was doing it, right? And they weren't, of course. And so I improved so much more than everyone else because I actually did the program, right? And so again, and I don't say this to sound like, oh, it's so simple. Job searching is so hard. It's so demoralizing, but there are ways that you can, help yourself and follow different programs or create your own routine or whatever it is. Do the work, right? Because most people are not going to do the work.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Jennifer. I did want to make one comment about the woman that you mentioned. There's a little bit of this identity thing going on, perhaps. I don't claim to know her, but perhaps with the victim identity, and that could be something that people get bogged down in that, especially if they get along this sort of momentum or trajectory, and things start to reinforce that, and it could be very debilitating, right? Mm-hmm. But I do want to jump back to something you mentioned earlier about saying no to things, and it's sort of in line with what are you doing now? Like, what are you doing now differently now than prior to 2015, right? And I suspect that maybe it has something to do with saying no to certain things and saying yes to certain things. But would love to hear you talk on that.
Yes. I would say, again, I'm still in recovery. So it's not like I've totally given up on everything, like as far as, oh, just say no and all of that. I do say yes to a lot of things. I think part of it is I love the concept of there's a time and a season for everything, right? So part of it is really understanding like what season of life you're in and what implications that has for you. So for example, my kids are older, so I don't necessarily have the same familial responsibilities that I used to. And that also provides me with a lot of opportunity to do things outside of, just my standard like work. And so I think the biggest thing for me is really crafting, again, back to this life, how do you create your dream life? How do you really orchestrate your own life rhythm? And so as part of that, I really feel strongly about having, that North Star, that vision for your life so that everything ties together. It's very similar to product management, where you want to have, where am I going? What's the direction? What are my strategies? Like, what am I actually going to invest time and effort into? And then ultimately, what is the roadmap for maybe a shorter time frame like this year? So for example, I need to refresh it because I've kind of come to a point where my North Star has been achieved in some ways. So
Ooh,
it's really
Yeah.
exciting like, this year. So I had this vision for my life, and I'm literally sitting here like living it, and I can't even stand it. But so like I need to refresh it because I'm like, okay, now what's next? But if you have that clarity of like, where do you want to go? What's your kind of big, audacious goal for yourself or for your life? And then what are the strategies? And strategy means like you've made choices, you've made decisions, right? So, like earlier this year, I said a couple things. Like, I haven't written down, so I don't have them off the top of my head, but like I said, I'm going to make time for giving back. I'm going to make time for friends and networking, and I'm going to make time for my health from a very specific perspective. Like I wanted to get way more consistent on my exercise and meditation, like just exercise every day, move my body, sweat, all of that. Like I had just gotten to a place where I wasn't quite as consistent with that post pandemic. And so I really needed to get back to that. So it's like get to the gym or whatever it is. So those were the three things that I wanted to do this year. And I set that intention, early on. And so it was really easy when things would come towards me. It's like, hey, this thing. And I'd be like, does it fit those three things? No, because my strategy this year was those three things. It was like, nope, that's not part of this. That's a no, right? Another thing comes in. It's like, ooh, yeah, that would be giving back and help me network. Great. Yes. Right. Best if it fits all three. But so that for me was it just creates that filter. It creates the ability to have really strong criteria where you're not having to make a decision every time. It's like you've already made the decision. This is what's important to me, maybe this year or this quarter, whatever the time frame is. But it all is rooted in your big life vision and kind of like what do you dream for yourself? And then ultimately, what does that mean in terms of your strategies? And that's again back to what are the deliberate choices you're going to make? Because everything you say yes to, you're simultaneously saying no to thousands of other things.
yeah, yeah.
Because we all have the same amount of time. That's it. Like you have the same amount of time. You can't manufacture more time.
And I think it's very powerful. But I would imagine you've had to zoom out to kind of come up with those three things, right? You'd had to zoom out and kind of look at where you've been, where you are, where you're going, where you want to be, to kind of come up with those criteria or filters, right? And getting to know is a very powerful thing. We talked to a lot of candidates about getting to know faster, getting to know or yes faster, and
Yes.
stop hanging around in this maybe zone, whether it's with a job opportunity or kind of a direction you want to go. Because you waste a lot of resources and time if you're just in that maybe zone, right? And it just consumes a lot of energy, and if you get something off your plate with a no, it gives you more chances to move some of those maybes to a yes, or take those maybes and just start driving those maybes, or sorry, those yeses, just driving those yeses. So
And when you're saying maybes, you're talking about like people going, hey, I'm going to apply for everything, anything and everything they can apply for. Is that what you mean by maybes? And really just honing in on exactly like what are the one or two things that you need to look for in your next job? I don't know, any advice, Jennifer, in terms of just, how, because
Yeah.
people right now, it's just like they don't have options, and they feel like they got to apply to hundreds of jobs just to get at least in front of one employer to have an interview. So what do people do in that case?
So I think it does come back to candidate market fit, which Phil talks about in their book. And so I think knowing where we're at, macroeconomic, from a market perspective, the opportunities that are available, I think you do have to step back and say, okay, yes, you need to align on what do you want, and also be realistic and match, right? Like, for example, with my background, if I'm job searching right now, I know that there's a lot of demand at the moment for strategy and operations, because product operations as a discipline and as a leadership opportunity is becoming more and more in the forefront, right? And so I know that even though my long-term plans are to be still that executive product leader CPO, I might step back and say, okay, I know that my skill set can lend itself to a couple different avenues, because I need to be a little bit more open, because the market, right, the supply is outpacing the demand at the moment, or at least it feels that way, right? I think some of the numbers show that as well, but it definitely feels that way. And so I think part of it is be really clear about what you want, but also, again, Phil does such a great job of talking about this. It's like you have to go where the jobs are. And so you may have this idea of, oh, my next role, I'm going to be blank, and this is my title, and this is my, salary, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying settle, but I am saying widen, like broaden what is possible. Make sure that you're attacking things from a couple different angles, and um, still be true to yourself. But I do think that you can take a step back, work with your support structure, work with your network, join a Never Search Alone group, and explore together, what you have that you can offer in a couple different areas, because then you're making yourself more marketable, right? And this is the type
Yeah.
of market where you need to do that. A market 5 years ago, sure, specific title, specific salary, you could be really picky. Now, maybe not so much, right? It just really depends on what area you're in and what's available. But I mean, that's the first thing I did it's the first thing I do when I start looking at job opportunities. I always look for, what types of roles are even out there available. I'm not applying. I'm not looking to see if, like, oh, can I apply to this? Am I a good fit for this? It's like, what is the market? Like, you're doing a market analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then trying to figure out, okay, so I'm kind of seeing a trend where, and that's another reason, by the way, another reason why I harp on this so much, like I preach this so much, but it's like, always be interviewing. And if you want to think of that as always be networking or always connecting, that's fine too. But like, always be in this mode of like interviewing and kind of, again, just seeing what's out there, what the trends are. And I think of that too, in terms of, if you have some ideal dream role in mind, if you have not gone and gotten like 5 job descriptions of that ideal role, like, someday in 5 years, in 10 years, I want to be X. If you have not done the exercise of getting those job descriptions and putting together your ideal job description of what you're working towards and doing a gap analysis, I want to be here, I'm here, and I need to go, like, what are you doing? You got to do that. Stop what you're doing and go do that, because you're doing yourself a disservice if you think just magically you're going to navigate a career over a decade or more and end up where you want to be.
Yeah.
Like, people that talk about, and again, I'm not trying to say this with judgment or criticism, but if you're talking about, oh, I just never get promoted, or I'm never going to make it to this level or be able to do this thing, again, do the work. Do the work. Like, part of that is you got to go figure out what they're looking for, and then make sure that you're working towards that, and don't go take detours. Figure out exactly the steps that you're pretty much going to need to get to that point. And I mean, it's not like a total guarantee, but I promise that you will yield really good results.
Yeah, I love that idea of sort of writing your resume backwards, so to speak, and looking where you want to be, gap analysis. That's great. I love that.
Yes.
And then the idea of always be interviewing. There's so many times where we will reach out to folks, especially in a passive candidate market, which it was, 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and a lot of people, they turn us down, like, oh, I'm not looking, but they won't even take a call, and now the script is flipped, so to speak,
Uh-huh.
and now there's a lot of folks out there that are just dying to get on the calendar with a recruiter so that they can do some, validation of the market and alignment with their skills. And now they're trying to build a quick relationship with a recruiter where they could have done that over time. And now they're kind of, they're in a hard place to connect with folks that can help validate their,
Right.
their candidate market fit. And so I think that's really, really great advice. Talk to me a little bit about, some of the best advice that you've received from a professional perspective, but also like maybe some of the worst advice you've received. Um, advice is like a dime a dozen. It's all over the place. And, you go on TikTok or whatever, LinkedIn or Facebook, you all kinds of different advice. So part of trying to discern what you let in and what you keep at bay, right? That's a very valuable skill. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on, super advice that you're like, yeah, this has stood the test of time versus, this advice I received that's just garbage.
Is this just, you want to hear kind of general or just specifically about job searching?
Either way, both, because
General?
like they're so intertwined, life and job search.
Yes. So I will say the worst advice I've ever received is the thing, and I'll say it generically and then I'll share a specific story. The worst advice is things that are highly kind of like personal, like stuff you can't change really, right? And then also things that aren't actionable. Like it's like, what do I even do with this? What is like what am I supposed to do with this? So again, it kind of feels more personal and like an attack, right? And so it's like not really advice, it's almost just like a straight up criticism. That's the worst, I think.
Is an example like, because I tend to be more introverted. It's like, oh, if you want to learn to network, you got to be more extroverted. Is it
Yeah.
like something like that?
Exactly. Like I'm a big fan of, play to your strengths. Don't focus on your quote unquote weaknesses. Like everyone has strengths and things that they bring to the table. And if you play your strengths right, you can, in essence, hack your weaknesses. Like you can take your strengths and turn them, bring up your weaknesses by using your strengths. I'll give you an example. My top strength is strategic, which means I'm always playing a chess game, like chess game going on in my head 24/7. I am all about options. If someone tells me, well, we just can't do that, that's not possible, I'm like, oh, like hell it's not. Like everything's possible. Like, I really don't like to be kind of like, hemmed in and, here's your little box. Like I want to always see the possibilities. There's always a way out. There's always a next thing that I can figure out. I can figure this out, right? Like I really like that. And so as an example, my top strength is strategic. My bottom strength, one of my bottom strengths is consistency and discipline and things like that, right? So like I'm very much a person who craves variety, and I don't really do well with like consistency and discipline. So the way that I create that discipline and consistency in my life is I have to be really strategic about it. I have to create a lot of options for myself in order to be strategically consistent or disciplined. So, for example, it does not work. Like, for example, my sister, she's amazing. Like, she runs marathons, she takes care of herself really well, like, just in terms of her health. And she listens to the same music, like, has the same playlist every single day running. At least at one point she did. This is what she told me. Maybe it's changed, but she would run every day and she would listen to the same exact playlist, right? That's consistency. That's discipline. that would just drive me bonkers. So when it comes to like exercise and moving, I have to lay out all these different options for myself and be like, okay, if I wake up early, I can go to this fitness class. And if I go over here and I ask a friend if I can come join them to do this. And, I get really like strategic about all these options for what I can try. I'm going to go stand up paddleboarding at 5 a.m. with one of my friends. That'll be great. I've never been stand up paddleboarding. Like, you know, so I have to be really, really like creative about being consistent. Because if someone told me, yes, you're gonna go do like yoga every day for the rest of your life, I'd be like, kill me now. And so I have to give myself a challenge, like strategically in my brain to figure that out. So that's just a silly one, but it's like some people, great, they're super consistent, but I don't think of myself as like not a consistent person. I never say that. I never say, well, my weakness is I'm not consistent. It's like, no, I'm strategically consistent. It may look different than someone else, but this is how I maintain consistency. And I fall off the wagon all the time and whatever. But bottom line is that's part of it. The worst advice that I received, for just as an example, is like I went into an annual performance review. This is many, many years ago. Annual performance review with my boss. I'd been working a lot with the executive team that year. And I walked in, and the thing she said to me was, well, the executive team thinks you just need to get over yourself. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And I feel offended, but I don't know why. And I want to do something with that, but I don't even know where to start. Like, get over yourself. What does that mean? Like, anyway, so that's just an example, right? Like, if you have an opportunity to give advice or feedback to someone and you're not giving them specific, actionable, timely advice or feedback, like you're doing them a disservice and messing with their head, honestly. Like it's just cruel. It's just cruel. So that's like the worst advice, I think, just in general. Like that's the category. The best advice, I'm trying to think the best advice I've gotten. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I heard this from anyone specifically, but honestly, in this environment, I feel like the best advice is always be interviewing. Like, don't ever stop kind of being in this mode, because the reality is you lose your skill, right? And you don't want to be developing the skill of job interviewing when you need it most. Like that's
Yeah.
the wrong time. And
Yeah.
people always ask me like, "Oh, how do I do that if I'm like happy at my current job or I just joined my current job?" It's like, yeah, you're not necessarily interviewing like the second you step into a new job. That's overwhelming, obviously. But and then the other one I hear a lot is like, "Oh, but then the recruiters, it like that's just not a good thing to do to recruiters." And I'm like, "Well, recruiters also interview you to try to hone and calibrate what they're looking for. So why wouldn't you be doing the same? Why
Yeah.
wouldn't you be interviewing, like reverse interviewing them to figure out if this is a job that you could see yourself in or it's a role that fits and where your gaps are? Like, you don't want to
Yeah.
be doing it like all the time, but
Yeah.
occasionally answer recruiters. Say,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to talk.
The other thing
Why-
too is like interviewing doesn't have to be a formal interview, right? When you think about what you're
Right.
doing in an
Exactly.
interview, you're doing two things in an interview. You're selling yourself, but you're an investigator, right? You're trying to ask thoughtful questions to understand, right, what the opportunity is about, what's important to you. And so you're doing two things. You're an investigator, but you're also, you're sort of a storyteller, right? You're pitching
Yes.
yourself. So you don't have to be in a formal interview to do that. You could be at a networking event. You could, be at a family party. And so get curious, right?
Yeah. And I would say that sometimes these recruiter calls or hiring manager calls, they don't really have to be interviews. They could just be introductory calls just to kind of get a sense of what's
Yeah.
out there, what kind of opportunities are out there. And, maybe it's a better opportunity for you, but it doesn't have to necessarily be an interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lou Adler, he's this old school recruiter. He's been around for decades. One of the things he always says, and I forget the script verbatim, but he says, you wouldn't leave your opportunity for a subpar opportunity anyway, right? So take the interview. If it's subpar to what you have, no foul. If it's better than what you have on multiple dimensions, then you would probably end up considering it, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, Jennifer, this has been awesome. I wish we had more time. We'll have to do this again for
Yes.
sure.
Part 2.
Yeah, part 2 for sure. We'll have to do this. How can the audience connect with you?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn, I have a link to my newsletter that I have. It's been really crazy. We've been moving and everything. So I haven't posted as much as I want, but yeah, so I have a newsletter, and then also feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. I respond to everything that doesn't feel like a sales pitch. And I try to respond. And yeah, I would love for anyone to, interact with me on LinkedIn or reach out. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. This will be published on Spotify over the next 2 days, and we'll send out links. And if you want more of this, continue to follow us and subscribe to us on LinkedIn as well as on Spotify. Thank you all. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.